The morning looked the same as every other morning. Soft grey light slipped through the window and rested quietly across the small room. The air felt still, almost sleepy, and outside the sky looked pale and calm, covered with slow-moving clouds drifting without purpose. Inside the room, everything sat exactly where it always had. A small desk stood near the wall. A chair was placed neatly beneath it, and a notebook lay perfectly straight beside a cup that had already gone cold. Nothing felt messy or chaotic. Everything felt safe. The person living in this room liked things this way, or at least that was what they had always believed. Every morning followed the same familiar pattern. They woke up, opened the window, prepared a quiet drink, and sat at the desk. The routine felt comfortable, like wearing soft clothes that never changed shape. The brain liked routines. It liked knowing what would happen next. It preferred certainty and predictability. But lately, something strange had begun happening. Even though the room was peaceful, a small heaviness had started to grow inside the chest of the person sitting at the desk. It was not pain, and it was not exactly sadness either. It felt more like a quiet question, one that never spoke loudly but never disappeared. The person stared at the notebook on the desk. The page was blank, and it had been blank for many days. Inside their mind lived countless ideas, dreams, and possibilities. Yet, every time the hand tried to write something new, another voice inside the brain gently interrupted. Maybe tomorrow. The brain was very good at this. It protected comfort. Whenever something felt uncertain, it quickly suggested safety instead. Stay with what you know. Stay where things feel familiar. The person did not realize how often this happened. One afternoon, a message appeared, inviting them to join a creative project. It was simple and harmless, just an opportunity to try something new. But the brain reacted instantly. What if it goes wrong? What if it becomes stressful? What if you are not ready? The message stayed open on the screen for several minutes before the person slowly closed it. Immediately, the brain felt relief. Crisis avoided. The room returned to its quiet calm. Days passed and the mornings continued to look the same. The soft light entered the room in the same gentle way, and clouds drifted across the sky outside. The routine repeated itself again and again. Wake up, drink something warm, sit at the desk. Safety remained constant, but something else was growing as well. A strange feeling began appearing whenever the person looked out the window at the outside world. Across the street, people moved quickly with energy. Some laughed loudly while others carried bags, walking with purpose toward unknown destinations. The person inside the room wondered what it might feel like to move like that, to step into something uncertain. But the brain answered immediately. That would be uncomfortable. The brain disliked discomfort. Discomfort meant risk, and risk meant unpredictability. The brain had one simple mission: protect safety. One evening, rain began falling outside. Soft drops tapped against the window glass, filling the quiet room with a slow, steady rhythm. The person sat near the window watching the streetlights reflect across the wet road. For a moment, the world looked beautiful. Golden circles shimmered across the pavement, and cars passed slowly, leaving glowing reflections behind them. It felt peaceful, yet something deep inside whispered again, "This life feels small." The thought appeared so suddenly that the person froze for a moment. Small? The room had everything necessary. It was calm, safe, and predictable. So why did the thought feel so true? The brain quickly responded with familiar logic. You are comfortable here. Comfort was powerful. It felt warm and easy. But comfort also had a quiet side effect the brain rarely explained. It slowly made the world smaller. The person looked around the room again. The same desk, the same chair, the same blank notebook. It suddenly felt strange that nothing had changed for so long. Outside, the rain stopped and a cool breeze drifted through the open window. carrying the fresh scent of wet streets. For a brief moment, curiosity appeared inside the mind. The person imagined stepping outside into the cool night air, walking down the street without a clear plan, simply seeing where the road might lead. The thought felt exciting, but almost immediately the brain activated its protection system again. That sounds unnecessary. Things are fine here. Slowly, the person closed the window. The room returned to stillness, safety restored. But the quiet question inside the chest refused to disappear. It appeared again the next morning, and the next after that. Even during the calm routine of everyday life, the person began noticing something they had ignored for years. Nearly every decision followed the same invisible rule. Choose comfort. Avoid uncertainty. Stay where things feel easy. The brain loved this rule. It saved energy, avoided stress, and kept life predictable. Yet deep down, the person began wondering something new. What if the brain's idea of safety was not the same as happiness? One evening, while sitting at the desk again, the person opened the notebook. The blank page waited patiently. For once, the brain did not say tomorrow. Instead, the person picked up the pen and wrote a single sentence. Just one. I wonder what happens outside my comfort zone. The moment those words appeared on the page, something quietly shifted in the room. Nothing dramatic happened. The desk remained still, and the soft light stayed the same. But inside the mind, a new awareness had begun forming. For the first time, the person saw something clearly. The comfort zone had never been forced upon them. It had been built slowly by their own brain, which believed it was helping. Yet the more the person thought about it, the more they realized something important. Safety was not the same as living. The notebook remained open as evening light faded. Outside, the sky turned deep blue, and distant city lights began appearing like small stars along the horizon. The person sat quietly, watching the page. For the first time in a long while, the blank space no longer felt intimidating. It felt like possibility. And somewhere inside the brain, a quiet conflict had begun. One part of the mind still wanted comfort, but another small voice had started asking a different question. What if growth begins exactly where comfort ends? The person closed the notebook gently. Tomorrow would likely look like every other morning, but something inside the mind was no longer exactly the same. A new awareness had begun to grow, and the brain was about to face something it rarely enjoyed. Change. The next morning arrived quietly. The same pale sunlight slipped through the window, slowly filling the small room with soft light. Outside, the clouds drifted lazily across the sky just as they did every other day. Nothing about the morning seemed different. Yet, inside the room, something felt slightly unfamiliar. The notebook was still resting on the desk, and the sentence written the night before remained on the page. I wonder what happens outside my comfort zone. The person stood beside the desk for a moment, staring at the words. Usually mornings began automatically. The brain followed the same routine without needing to think wake up, drink something warm, sit down, and repeat yesterday. But today the brain paused. It noticed the sentence, and immediately a quiet wave of hesitation moved through the mind. Maybe that sentence was just a thought. The brain whispered gently. Nothing needs to change. The brain always preferred stability. It liked patterns, predictability, and control. Yet something inside the person had already begun shifting. For the first time, the sentence did not feel like a random idea. It felt like a question that deserved an answer. The person walked over and opened the window. Cool morning air entered the room, carrying faint sounds of distant traffic and people beginning their day. Across the street, someone hurried along while speaking on the phone. Another person rode a bicycle down the quiet road. The outside world looked active and alive. For years, the person had watched life from this same window, always observing, never stepping into it. The brain quickly noticed the direction of these thoughts. "That is unnecessary," it said softly. "You are comfortable here." Comfort still felt warm and familiar, but now it also carried a strange heaviness. The person looked back at the notebook again. Then something small but important happened in that moment. A decision. It was not a dramatic life change. It was only a small step. The person grabbed a jacket hanging near the door. Instantly, the brain reacted. "Wait," it said. "What is the plan? Where are you going?" The person did not have a clear answer, and that uncertainty made the brain nervous. Still, the door opened slowly. Cool air touched the person's face as they stepped outside. Immediately, the brain filled with unfamiliar signals. This is different. This is unpredictable. This might be uncomfortable. The street looked larger from the outside. Buildings seemed taller, the sounds were louder, and the wind felt colder than expected. The brain whispered again, "You can go back inside." The thought was tempting. Returning to the room would be easy. Everything there was known and familiar. But instead, the person stayed outside for just a moment longer. Then they took a few small steps forward. Each step felt strangely meaningful. The brain continued sending warnings. What if this leads nowhere? What if it feels awkward? What if this is pointless? Yet something surprising began happening after a few minutes. The fear did not grow. It slowly started shrinking. The brain began noticing something important. Nothing bad was happening. The street was simply a street. People passed by without paying attention. A breeze moved through the trees, and the world continued its ordinary rhythm. The brain relaxed slightly. Its alarm system had expected danger, but instead it found something else experience. The person continued walking, not quickly and not with a clear destination, just walking. Sunlight reflected from nearby windows, creating bright flashes along the sidewalk. On the corner, a small cafe released the warm smell of fresh coffee into the cool air. For the first time in a long while, the person noticed the small details of the world. The sound of footsteps, the movement of leaves in the wind, and the quiet rhythm of everyday life. Inside the brain, something new was beginning to happen. Adaptation. The brain was starting to understand that unfamiliar situations were not automatically threats. Sometimes they were simply new. Eventually, the person reached a small park at the end of the street. Fresh green grass stretched across the open space, still slightly wet from the rain the night before. A few people sat on benches while birds wandered across the ground searching for food. The person sat quietly on a bench, taking in the scene. The mind felt different, now not perfectly confident, but more awake. The brain observed this new environment carefully. At first it searched for risks, but slowly it began noticing something else. Energy, curiosity, and possibility. A quiet realization began forming. The brain had spent years protecting comfort, but comfort had slowly reduced the size of the world. The comfort zone was never meant to be a permanent home. It was meant to be a starting point. The person sat there watching sunlight move slowly across the grass. For the first time, the outside world did not feel overwhelming. It felt open. The brain began asking new questions. What else exists beyond routine? What opportunities have been ignored? What experiences have been missed? The person smiled slightly. These questions no longer felt frightening. They felt exciting. After a while, the person stood up and walked back toward the apartment. The same buildings lined the street, and the same windows reflected the sky. Yet something had changed, not the environment, but the mind. When the person returned to the room, everything looked exactly the same as before. The desk stood near the wall. The chair rested beneath it. The notebook remained open. But the room no longer felt like the entire world. It felt like one small part of it. The person sat down and opened the notebook again. The sentence written the night before waited quietly on the page. Beneath it, the person wrote something new. The comfort zone feels safe because the brain loves certainty. But growth begins the moment the brain learns that uncertainty is not danger. The person paused, looking at the words. The brain had always believed it was protecting happiness, but now something clearer had appeared. The brain protects survival. Growth requires courage, and courage often begins with very small steps, just like the one taken this morning. The notebook closed gently. Outside, the sky had grown brighter, and sunlight filled the room with a warm glow. The world was still full of unknown paths, but for the first time, the unknown no longer felt like something to avoid. It felt like something waiting to be explored. Somewhere deep inside the mind, the brain quietly accepted a new truth. Safety is comfortable, but comfort alone cannot create the life someone truly wants. Sometimes the brain must be gently challenged, not with fear, but with curiosity. Because the moment a person steps outside the comfort zone, even in the smallest way, something powerful begins to happen. The brain learns. It adapts. It grows stronger. And suddenly the world becomes much larger than the room it once believed was enough. If this story made you think about your own comfort zone, leave a like. Sometimes the smallest step outside it can change everything.